Welcome, viewers and listeners, to another edition of CHP Talks. We're here with repeat guest, Kris Sims. Kris, thank you for joining us again today. It's wonderful to have you on the program. It's always appreciated.
I love being a part of your show. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, Kris Sims, of course, most of you know as the Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. She's a longtime journalist in Canada, one of the founding reporters for Sun News Network. She's worked in and around government for more than 20 years and survived. She's been a frequent and much appreciated contributor to this program. And I just want to say at the outset, if you're not already a receiver of the Taxpayer magazine, I urge you to go to taxpayer.com and subscribe and contribute to the work of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. They do such great work informing Canadians about how your taxes are being wasted and misused, and they are a powerful and respected advocacy group pushing for lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government. So, once again, Kris, thanks for joining us today. And you and Franco and your team do such great work. I love listening to your podcasts. You guys have fun talking about all this dismal stuff going on in Ottawa and making fun of it where that's appropriate, but also bringing forward the urgency of it and the implications for taxpayers of some of the terrible decisions being made in Ottawa. So, one of the things that I've noticed recently, you've had a couple of discussions about the six-figure salaries at CBC. So maybe people might not know what a six-figure salary is in relation to going to a journalist or a broadcaster. So do you want to just lead us into that discussion?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for covering this. It's one of those things where I find some folks who I would say who are from my generation or a little bit older kind of have this residual impression of CBC. They think that it's still Peter Zosky in the morning and Knowlton Nash at night or a little bit before that time. And when the CBC started, a lot of folks think that they were the first radio station in Canada. That's actually not true. There were more than 100 private radio stations in Canada that were doing great work before the CBC ever started. The reason why the CBC took off, of course, is because they did very good coverage of the Second World War. And we had reports from the front lines from legends like, Lauren Green, other folks who were over there as correspondents. So, news wise, just a bit of a history lesson. That's why CBC Radio really kind of entrenched itself. Also, a big part of it was to get more listeners in Canada who weren't listening to American radio stations. At the time, the soap opera, it's literally to sell soap. That's why they're called soap operas. The radio drama soap operas
Yeah.
were really powerful and popular coming out of big radio powerhouse stations like Chicago and New York. And it was really popular, especially across the prairies. And so CBC got started, and even then it was on shaky ground with the government saying, should we really be spending money on this? Like, is it government's mandate to do something like this? They were just trying to get Canadian ears. And back then they would record, do the hockey game. They would give you weather, and a little bit of like the funny stuff, right, to replace the American soap operas.
Mhm.
Needless to say, we can get that anywhere now, anywhere.
Yeah.
Even folks in remote locations can get a satellite subscription service for not that much money, and get the weather from anywhere. There are farmers, Rod, I'm sure you've met them, where the technology they use for the weather is astonishing. It looks like something better than NASA. So things have changed. And now the CBC is this enormous, I call it the big unaccountable blob.
Yeah.
You remember that movie back from the late 50s, early 60s, The Blob?
Well, no, I don't. Sorry.
Oh, it's quite cute and it's pretty family friendly. It's
Yeah.
not gory. It just looks like big red jello
Okay.
taking over a town. And so I like classic film. And excuse me, the CBC is now this big unaccountable blob because now it's costing us $1.4 billion with a B this year. To put that kind of money into perspective, that could otherwise pay the full-time salaries of 7,000 paramedics plus 7,000 police officers
Wow.
instead. And what gets me, and getting to your point about our recent article that I wrote with Franco, um, there's an old anecdote. You've probably heard it, where if you're a journalist in what I used to call a normal newsroom, a private newsroom outside of CBC, for every one of you, there's like six of you over at the CBC, and they each have like, 10 managers or something. Now, based on documents we obtained at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, that's showing to be true.
Wow.
And the reason why we say six figures is because it's literally six digits. So we asked for a list of employees who are making more than $100,000 per year at the CBC. What's astonishing, Rod, is how many managers are on there. We've got close to 500 managers at the CBC, more than 700 producers. We've got supervisors, we've got advisors, we've got architects, lead architects.
Wow.
I don't know what those folks do, but I know they're paid more than $100,000 a year. And this is what's also astonishing is that they blacked out 200 roles on that list. So we know they exist. We know they're paid more than $100,000 per year. We have no idea what they do. And folks might be thinking, oh, well, they don't want to put a host on there for whatever reason. No, no, the hosts are listed on there. Most of them have their names on there. So we don't know what these mystery 200 people are, but you're paying for them. And this is why we're sounding the alarm, because the CBC is this huge bloated mass. And now we know that that's true.
And of course, that it was a 1.4 billion that it
Yes.
takes to float this leaky vessel, this leaking taxpayer dollars, uh, and that's directly out of your pockets, our pockets as taxpayers, right? And what bugs me about CBC, it's not just that they're, I mean, I think that you have to call this a waste of money. Surely the amount of work they do could be accomplished with less, but what they put out is damaging to our society in many ways. They have led in a lot of the I'm going to call them unfortunate directions that our society has gone in terms of gender, abortion, those types of things. CBC has been a proponent of those issues, and of course, more pointedly, they are because they receive taxpayer dollars because they're funded by taxpayers through this government we have through the shell government in Ottawa. They have become proponents and supporters and defenders of the status quo in Ottawa, basically currently the Liberal government. But it doesn't necessarily mean matter whether it is the Liberal government or Conservatives. They are supporting the status quo, and that is really not what we should be paying them to do. Plus, a lot of their programming is um, repugnant. Some of their so-called entertainment stuff is not worth listening to or watching. So we're paying for all that. And how do you think it got to be that way? Like, how did it go from someone reporting faithfully and truthfully on the front in World War II to being a social advocacy thing paid by taxpayers that is pushing in the left direction? Left.
That's a great question. There's so much there. I'm going to take off my Taxpayers Federation hat a little bit at the
Yeah,
beginning because I think it deserves a fulsome answer.
yeah,
So full disclosure, I did work at the CBC actually for about 6 weeks,
yeah.
and they were fine to me. This got nothing to do with my own experience there. However, I've been in the game, as they call it, for a long time. I've been in the national arena for more than 20 years. And so I know a lot of folks who work both inside the CBC, now they're outside, they're still in, who private media, alternative media, startup media, you name it. Um, I will say that we have seen evidence, especially for the last few years. You've probably seen like that Travis gentleman that was speaking up,
Yeah.
saying that he felt unheard at the CBC. There was other examples of folks who said that they felt that there was a severe lack of diversity of opinion.
Yeah.
I will say, as somebody who was born and raised in rural Western Canada,
Mhm.
you know, like I've ridden horses most of my life, like, you know, I've got family that's worked in the energy sector, like you name it. I didn't feel very well represented at the CBC. And this was back in, say, 2012. And again, to be fair, they were kind to me. Like
Yeah.
I was only
Yeah.
there for a few weeks. However, I have heard directly from former colleagues where that wasn't their experience and they keep on grinding this out. I'll give you, for example, there were some great reporters that worked at the CBC. Trish Wood, for example. I don't know if any of your listeners or if you follow her podcast. Crackerjack investigative journalist. She's one of the veterans, I would call her. She was one of the key reporters for the show Fifth Estate. Right? People might remember how powerful that show was.
Right.
And you know, so there's a journalism element here where I think what happened is that, again, the Taxpayers Federation are opposed to this on principle because journalists shouldn't be paid by the government,
Right.
period.
Yeah.
It's a waste of money. You shouldn't pay for that. But from a journalistic standpoint, if I were to guess from my own experience in the industry, I think what happened is two things. One, what we just mentioned, the top heavy middle management bloat. Most people have had this experience where they've got a decent team of workers who are actually out there doing stuff. So in this case, with their microphones and their pens and their cameras and their informants. But the more management you add, more cooks in the kitchen, the more time they have to spend
Sure.
dreaming up ways to manage people over
Yeah.
and over and over again. You bake that in with kind of permanent government jobs, add 2 decades to it, and you become this kind of bureaucratic monolith instead of a newsroom.
Right.
From my experience, I'll just give you an example. Like if you're working in talk radio, private talk radio, you've usually got one or two producers, even for a national show that is syndicated across Canada.
Mhm.
The CBC, last time I poked my head in there, their 5 o'clock political show, the one that's on TV, to be fair, which requires more producers, they had like 12 producers, 15 producers. Like it's one of those things where it keeps getting thicker and thicker and thicker. And so you asked me what happened, like the big change. Like obviously society changes. We've
Yeah.
changed quite a
Yeah.
bit from the
Right.
war. But on I do think that it's a combination of too much management, entrenched in one area, combined with the fact that in normal newsrooms, private newsrooms, just generally speaking, like journalists have vacated the premises. Just the number of journalists available to cover things has been decimated in private industry.
Mhm.
For every newsroom that used to have like 18 people in there, there's now two. Like, I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
When I graduated journalism school, I'll give you a hard example. I graduated journalism school in the late 90s out of BCIT. Back then, there were two full-time, I mean, pay your mortgage salary level jobs. Two full-time writers for just the Vancouver Sun newspaper.
Okay.
One newspaper covering softwood lumber.
Wow. That,
That
that,
was their whole,
that's
yeah,
their job. Wow.
that was their whole job.
Yeah.
Like, I can't stress this enough. In every courtroom and courthouse that was built, before, 2000, go to the front bench and look. There's usually old nameplates from media organizations that
Hmm.
would just go there routinely because you had a court reporter on staff.
Yeah. Wow.
And so while CBC has gotten bigger and bigger, private newsrooms have been getting smaller and smaller. So I know that's a long, complicated answer, but I think that it deserved one. Fundamentally, it honestly wouldn't matter if it was the late Rex Murphy, God rest his soul, reading the news and Don Cherry giving me the sports.
Yeah.
I'd probably enjoy that a lot
Yeah.
more, but taxpayers still
Yeah.
shouldn't pay for it.
Yeah.
It isn't the ideology, it's the fact that out of principle, journalists shouldn't be paid by the government.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned like society changes. So, in one sense, it's not surprising that CBC's reporting or their slant on stories has drifted to leftward. Let's just using that terminology, left and right. But the what bugs me is that they have been more of a thermostat than a thermometer. They have been actually pushing or pulling advocating in that direction. And so when we say society has changed, yes, it's changed, and part of that, the credit or blame for that goes to the CBC.
I'll give I'll give you another quick example of just how stark this is. Let's use the last election, for example. Okay. Candidate A in the red team is standing there on the sidewalk getting interviewed by an employee of the CBC, microphone in hand, camera rolling. Candidate A says, I will give your employer more than 100 million more dollars if I'm elected prime minister.
Yeah,
Okay. Candidate B, same story, same location, wearing a blue jersey, talking to that CBC employee. I will defund your employer completely.
right,
How on earth is that CBC employee or any journalist that is funded by the government supposed to call that game straight?
right.
You
No,
can't. That is a direct conflict of interest.
exactly, exactly. So, Um, what can taxpayers do about this besides becoming informed? And that's important. That's why they should become, if they're not already, they should become subscribers and members of Canadian Taxpayer Federation. But what can we do to push back on this? Like you mentioned, I think our current Prime Minister actually wants to give more money to the CBC, not less. And of course, they don't have any money. That's money that comes from taxpayers' pockets and from future taxpayers, more and more and more. What can we do to rein this in a little bit?
You're right, it is future taxpayers because the government is now got us more than $1.2 trillion in debt. So every time the government announces new spending, tack interest onto that.
Yeah,
And imagine your kids and grandkids paying for it.
yeah,
What they can do is two things. One, I would strongly encourage them to read this themselves. Go to our website, taxpayer.com, click on the newsroom, and our latest one there, I think it's entitled The CBC is a Bureaucratic Blob, something like that. It's also in the Toronto Sun newspaper chain. Read the stats yourself. We have links in there. It shows the documents, it shows the FOIs. Ask yourself if you should be paying for close to 500 managers at the CBC, like more than 700 producers, advisors, like all these strange titles that really don't exist in other media companies. Ask yourself if this is a good use of your taxpayer dollars. And if you don't think so, if you want to defund the CBC or to at least hold it to account, at least make it answer straight questions, I would recommend you contact members of parliament on the Heritage Committee. That's a serious homework assignment.
yeah,
Ask them to call the new CEO to testify at the Heritage Committee because they're going to be sitting this fall. We would love it if people would very politely encourage the members of parliament on the Heritage Committee to invite the brand new CEO of the CBC, who's getting paid about $500,000 a year, to answer questions about why there are so many people on their sunshine list.
right. Very good. The one of the things that brought out, I looked at your other article on your site, CBC six-figure salaries soar.
Hmm.
And it points out that between 2015, that's not going all the way back, but 10 years ago, there were we were paying staff the staff that were getting over 100,000 a year. There were 438 of them. We were paying 59.6 million. And now there are not 438, but 1,831 staff getting over $100,000 a year, and we're paying them $240 million. So I think most of our viewers and listeners are not operating in that range, and certainly probably most of them are doing more constructive and productive work than what is happening there behind the scenes. So thanks for bringing that forward. Now, if we have time, I'd like to ask you about this the government move and legislation towards uh, zero emission vehicles. And apparently that's been on the books since 2023, but now we're getting closer. The first deadline for that change is next year, 2026. They want to have 20% of all vehicles sold in Canada, they want to be zero emission vehicles. Of course, before going into that, zero emission means the car has zero emission. It doesn't mean the production of the car, the production of the batteries, the production of the infrastructure. All that takes takes carbon emissions. But this play on words, zero emission vehicles. Anyway, jump into that and tell us what we need to know about this move away from gas powered vehicles.
That's a great point you made about the production of the vehicles themselves. Our friends over at Second Street, which is a not-for-profit advocacy organization, secondstreet.org, they did a deep dive onto that of, oh, how many emissions actually go into making a zero emission vehicle? So that was a good point. What we're fighting at the Taxpayers Federation is this ban, this looming very soon ban on normal gasoline and diesel powered vehicles. We're fighting this for two main reasons. One, the government has no place in the garages of the nation.
Right.
Because,
Very good.
sorry for the fun play on
Yeah,
words. You
no,
have to
that's
have some
good.
fun. So government shouldn't tell you what kind of vehicle you can drive. If you choose to purchase a battery-powered electric vehicle and plug it into your house and charge it as you go to, that is completely up to you. Like that is totally fine because you're an adult and you're a free person, supposedly living in Canada, and you should be able to pick what kind of vehicle you want. On the flip side, if you need a gas or diesel powered vehicle, that should be your business. So, one, the government shouldn't tell you what kind of vehicle you can drive. Two, and in a much bigger way, as far as the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is concerned, we don't have the money for this. Like, Canada does not have the money for this. Not only are our governments dumping tens of millions of dollars into corporate welfare schemes for huge multinational corporations to manufacture batteries for vehicles, by the way, which I just checked the last quarterly sales report, are accounting for about 9%, single digit, 9% of new vehicle sales, meaning people aren't purchasing these things in droves, okay? So we're blowing a lot of taxpayers' money on that side. And second, we don't have the power for this. Like the energy is not there. Can I get really nerdy about this,
Yes,
Rod? Can I
please.
do the math?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
So I sat there one weekend in the winter, this past winter in Alberta. We unfortunately actually get alerts on our phones saying, don't use your hair dryer. We're about to have a blackout in the
Mhm.
morning because our grid has been screwed up because they tried to outlaw certain forms of energy in Alberta and now we're catching up. However, I started asking myself, what would happen if we all had electric cars the way the government wants us to? So I did the math, and for the private vehicles that are already on the road, that we already own, okay? Don't think about trucking or commercial, just privately owned residential vehicles. If we were to magically change them into electric, which is ultimately what the government does want to see happen in Canada, we would need 14 huge new CANDU reactors tomorrow. Not counting the transmission lines, not counting the charging stations, not counting how we're actually going to mine the products to build these things. So 14 new CANDU reactors. Each of those things costs around 13-ish billion dollars
Mm.
each.
Wow.
They each take about 10 years to build. And you don't need to take my math for it, which I worked into my article. Natural Resources Canada actually farmed out a study, which they posted on the government website. It is going to cost upwards of $300 billion to transition to electric vehicles in Canada. It
Mhm.
is astonishing. Like it's actually not doable.
No.
Like we're just kind of waiting for Carney to realize the math is totally against him here. Like he can't do this. We have to scrap this. And you're right. The restrictions start kicking in 5 months.
Oh,
Like
well,
we don't have 10 years to wait for this.
yeah. And they want absolute 100% switch over by 2035, right?
Correct.
100% of passenger vehicles and light duty trucks to be electric or zero emission, so-called zero emission by then. Um, the other thing is, of course, in order to get there, if I mean, I agree with you, we cannot get there. It's impossible. And the people who are used to going out and getting into a vehicle and driving, if the government continues to push this agenda, there are people today can drive and do what they need to do, get to their work and take the kids to soccer and whatever, who will not be able to do that
That's
if
correct.
this is pushed forward. Um, but aside from that, in order to manipulate people, force people, compel them, drag them, push, pull, or carry people to this finish line. That requires subsidies, government subsidies. They're already subsidizing or giving credits. It's about the same thing uh, for manufacturers who would install charging stations and things like that. And they are subsidizing the purchase of these vehicles. So they know that the cost is much higher for one of these vehicles, and people right now, as you say, are not choosing on their own to make that transition. But the cost is so out of reach that the government wants to subsidize. Of course, that's not helping anybody. That means there are more tax dollars going into this circular basket, right? That we call government spending. So, how do we? Well, let me ask you this: what do you think Carney sees in this? Like, he needs to be convinced because he's going to have to back up or bend the knee or somehow change direction. How likely do you think that is, or is he just going to take us over the cliff, or is he subject to some level of taxpayer pressure?
Excellent observation. I'm just going to reach around and grab his book here,
Yeah.
actually. So this I would strongly recommend everybody read this book, okay? It is written by Mark Carney, who's now the Prime Minister. It was written a couple of years ago when he was the UN Special Envoy, okay, on like climate related stuff. It's called Values. It actually that is a picture of the earth with scaffolding around it, okay? Basically how to rebuild the earth, in his vision or in his group's vision. Um, there's a very specific person's voice writing this. In this book, he talks about the need for carbon taxes. He talks about the need for global carbon taxes. He refers to things such as natural gas power plants, ICE, internal combustion engine vehicles like gasoline and diesel, as future stranded assets,
Hmm.
which
Well,
is interesting. He pushes for something called personal carbon emissions budgets for individuals. He doesn't explain what he means by that. I don't know what he means by that. I don't know how he would monitor and or tax somebody if you go over a personal carbon emissions budget. There is a lot in here. Okay,
yeah.
there's a lot about the lockdowns too, but I would just from a carbon tax, don't ban our vehicles kind of perspective that the Taxpayers Federation is fighting, I strongly recommend people read this book.
Yeah.
Question is, to your point exactly, sir, Are we dealing with this gentleman who wrote this book? Or are we dealing with somebody who has a degree in economics from Oxford, which he does? Clearly an intelligent man, clearly understands, like, fiscal policy, to borrow a term. Um, so I guess the question is, we'll have to wait and see who turns up
Yeah.
in Parliament. Is
Well,
it going to be somebody who, perhaps he was writing this book because he was in that role at the time? I don't know. Um, Ultimately, though, I think that this whole ban on gasoline and diesel powered vehicles, especially considering the fact that the United States of America, with whom we do billions and billions and billions of trade, and we have an integrated auto manufacturing sector, like you think that our trade, usual cross-border trade is integrated. They literally have one auto part. I think I saw a stat saying one auto part can cross that bridge between Detroit and Windsor like 10 times to go in one vehicle.
well,
It's the same company, it's the same system. So for us to sit here and say, we're still going ahead with our ban on gas and diesel vehicles while the United States has totally scrapped their plans
yeah.
and the natural market demand for these battery powered vehicles has now slumped to 9%, even in Canada. Like, I believe that he's going to have to allow common sense to win out because we do not have the money for this.
Yeah.
Like the amount, I'll put it this way, the amount of unmoney we have right now, the federal debt, okay? The interest alone that we are paying on that federal debt is $1 billion a week.
Yeah.
To visualize that, imagine that every week, instead of watching Hockey Night in Canada or something on a Saturday night, imagine that every week Canada would build a brand new hospital. All the paint's in there, the chrome's up, put up, all that parking lines, everything. Every week, before we go in, burn it down.
No,
That's what we are spending just on interest.
exactly.
So we do not have the money for this stuff. We don't have the money to ban people's vehicles or to force them to buy a vehicle that they can't or won't want to use. So I do ultimately believe in common sense, and I do think he's going to have to climb down on this and say, you know what, it's just not in the cards. We're not going to do this.
Well, that would be a welcome change on that. And defund the CBC would be another one. And maybe elbows down for a while because the elbows up strategy that got him re-elected or got him elected for the first time ever isn't working.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're facing some severe troubles at our border, and we don't need to make that worse with our zero emission vehicle uh, ideology. So, Kris, before we go, thank you very much for all of this. Before we go, I want to mention to our viewers and listeners, I just filled out recently a questionnaire, a survey from Canadian Taxpayers Federation, which came out to all the supporters and those who are regular viewers or subscribers to the Taxpayer magazine. Um, and I want to encourage our people to go on taxpayer.com, become supporters, and I think for another couple of weeks, this survey is still going to be available. And Kris tells me there probably will be another survey reminder coming out. It would be great to have our viewers and listeners become active supporters of Canadian Taxpayers Federation. It's such an important organization and have your say in the things that are important. You're being asked by the Taxpayers Federation, what do you think are the most important issues that they should be focusing on? Because they have done such a tremendous job on the carbon tax, educating our public on the carbon tax. Of course, we're still paying the industrial carbon tax, which people don't always realize. But anyway, please go to taxpayer.com and become members or subscribers. And then if you get that survey in the email, which you will if you're a subscriber, fill it out and let the Taxpayers Federation know What are the most important issues to you? Kris Sims, Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, thank you once again for coming on and enlightening us on some of these critical issues that we are facing as citizens and taxpayers in Canada.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. God bless you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you all next week for another edition of CHP Talks.